Hello, and welcome to the Whale Hunting Podcast, where we shine a light onto hidden worlds of money and power. I'm Bradley Hope, and this week I'm joined by Jamie Bartlett, author, journalist, and podcaster behind the Missing Cryptoqueen. Welcome, Jamie.
Well, thanks for having me.
So, Jamie, you know what? I want to just start with you. How did you get into journalism? And, we're going to end up with the Cryptoqueen at some point, but give me some background on how you got started.
Yeah, well, I'm not even really a journalist, to be honest. I think I just do journalism by mistake. I was a researcher, I worked for a think tank, and then at some point, it's a weird story actually. I don't know if you remember the English Defence League. It was a football hooligan / sort of nationalist anti-immigration movement in the late noughties. And I could see they're all over Facebook, and no one really understood them, but they were very, very big. And I thought, I wonder if I could use targeted Facebook ads to target supporters of the English Defence League. Gave it a whirl, spent about £100 and got 2,000 of them to fill in my survey, which I'd used Facebook to target them with. And I thought, oh my goodness me, there's this whole world of studying and understanding social media movements, vast data sets, something weird's going on, and no one's really trying to analyse it properly. And that just sort of opened up a whole world, obviously. And then suddenly I'm writing a book about the darknet, and then everyone knows me to be the darknet guy. And then one thing sort of leads to another, and then I hear about this Cryptoqueen story. And I'd never made a podcast before that, so I didn't know what I was doing. But it was a very successful podcast for the BBC, and still going now, all these years later. And then I've made other podcasts since, and suddenly I'm a podcaster. So I feel like at every stage, it's just been, I've become something by mistake, and I just keep going.
But how do you, what guides you? What guides your nose into what's a good story? I mean, are you following your curiosity? It seems like you have a taste for things that are kind of touched into the world of the online or technology, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think my original vision was I want to understand what's going on online. This was back in 2008 when I really got started on this. So it's a long time ago now, but it was clearly transforming society in ways that most ordinary people didn't quite understand. And I sort of always thought about my parents or my grandparents, and I just wanted them to understand what was going on. Got to find a good... And the whole thing for me was find fascinating stories, interesting characters, weird things going on online that carries a story, gets people interested and excited. And through that, explain a hidden, mysterious part of the internet. Explain how cryptocurrency works. Explain how the darknet really works. Because a lot of this stuff is very technical and people get put off by that. But if you're hunting for a missing woman on the run, or if you're trying to expose how darknet drug dealers work on Tor hidden service chat rooms and marketplaces, it's exciting, but through that people will hopefully learn something bigger. And that's what I'm always trying to do, the story that opens up a world that a normal person is going to understand and be interested in.
Yeah, I think this is something that's really close to our heart as well, because we have this podcast out now called Fur and Loathing, and it's kind of about the world of the furries, which is primarily an online world.
Yeah.
And Nikki in the podcast says, I've always been obsessed with online things because what happens online eventually comes into the real world. It maybe takes a few years, but QAnon, everything that was going on there. Yeah.
On 4chan.
But can you talk a bit more about that what happens online eventually sort of has a consequence? I mean, what are some of the things that you've seen like that
Sure.
It's kind of like a harbinger, right? Of what's to come.
Well, my basic theory of everything when it comes to the internet is that radical movements, extremists, weirdos, oddballs are early adopters of technology, and sooner or later the rest of us catch up with them. And there's lots of reasons for that, but especially when it comes to producing and sharing content or using the media somehow, because they all feel like mainstream established media hates them, doesn't understand them, and so they're looking for alternatives. This is why, who were the first people who were really thinking, I wonder if I could use encrypted messaging apps, anonymous web browsers, cryptocurrencies to construct a functioning marketplace. Well, it's all darknet drug dealers. They were the ones that had realised this technology can be brought together to create a marketplace in illicit goods. 10 years later, Barclays Bank and JP Morgan and all the other big financial institutions are thinking, wow, this crypto stuff is really interesting, isn't it? I mean, maybe there is a really good use case for some of this blockchain technology. And I see it so often. It's famous already. Pornography is often cited as the example of who was the first people to invent pop-ups and VHS and all the using all those early technologies. It was pornographers. And who were the very, very best users of social media to market and campaign their political ideas? It was radical right-wing movements. Stormfront always had websites and chat forums and bulletin board systems far better than the Republican or Democrat Party ever did. 10 years later, those parties finally catch up and start making their own ones. So it always felt like the fringe movements when it comes to the internet are ahead of the curve.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe in a way, technology it brings to life or it expands this other dimension that's probably always existed. Like in the Roman times, there was a hidden side to everyday life. There was brothels and whatever down this alleyway. But I feel like technology just expands that and explodes it. Like the other day, I was looking at Telegram, and it has this option to say, look at who's near you. And if you look at it, there's a whole list of illicit and different services on there. And I thought to myself, well, I had no idea that this is like how people might access those illicit services. They just turn this function on. This is an app controlled by some other party in the world that made it possible to connect with people that you would never connect with before, Yeah. And I feel like technology has just really exploded that in a way.
Yeah, of course. And I often think of I often get it slightly wrong as well. So when I did this TED talk about the darknet and how fascinating it was there, and it felt a little bit like the early internet. It was wild, raucous, unruly. There's really good stuff there, really bad stuff there. Whistleblower sites and journalists and white hat hackers, but also all the drug dealers and the illegal pornographers. They're all sort of in the same place. And I predicted in this TED talk that this was maybe in 2014, that pretty soon we'd all be using the darknet because we'd all start to value internet privacy more, because most of the mainstream didn't realise just how much data was out there about them and how dangerous that could be. So I was like, everyone's going to get on the darknet and we're all going to be using VPNs and Tor and encrypted messaging apps. And I was wrong about the darknet stuff, but I wasn't wrong about how important privacy became, because now, like, my parents are on Signal. So sometimes you're slightly wrong in your predictions, but you can see which way sort of the traffic's moving.
Early on, I remember when you went on Signal, and then all the people you saw on Signal were sort of the shadiest people you know.
Yeah.
So this is true of journalists especially. You've got a lot of shady people in your phone. But over time, like you say, it's now just a format of communication. Yeah. It's no longer has that edge to it anymore.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. And just, I suppose, it's been fascinating to see how much privacy has mainstreamed as a concern, and I can only think that's going to continue because we're producing more data all the time. The whole model of cybersecurity is completely broken, because every single day some gigantic hospital trust or British Library or tech company or whatever loses $500 million or $500,000 or whatever it is, user data, user passwords, and it doesn't seem to work. And we still haven't figured out what we do about that. It's one of the next great challenges anyway.
Well, I hope you solve it. But
it's a lot of money for whoever can.
I think we've got a startup brewing here. So, okay, let's get to Cryptoqueen. You've told the story many times, I'm sure, but maybe you can just explain how you stumbled first upon the story of OneCoin and how that journey all began. Yeah.
Well, it's late 2018, and a BBC producer called Georgia gets in touch with me saying, I've come across this story. I've actually been pitched this OneCoin investment at a dinner party. Now, I know you've been studying this area. Do you know anything about it? I'd never heard of this. I thought I knew all of the cryptos back then. I was a bit of an expert back in those days. I'd never heard of OneCoin. And she said, really? Because it's a multi-billion-dollar cryptocurrency that claims to be the third largest of all, behind Bitcoin and Ethereum. And I thought, that's not possible. I'd know about this. And she said, the best thing is that the woman seems to be on the run. would you like to make a podcast about it? Should we take a look? And off we go. And that's where it all starts. The story, very briefly, is that in 2014, Dr. Ruja Ignatova, she's a German-Bulgarian, brilliant financial mind, academic, PhD. She basically realizes that there's she says to the world, Bitcoin's already exploded. You've missed the boat, but there's a new one. It's mine. It's called OneCoin. And it's very cheap at the moment, and it's going to go up in value like Bitcoin, the usual pitch that you always hear from these early startup cryptos. But she says the difference is you don't buy and sell OneCoin on an exchange platform. You buy it through multi-level marketing. So, Amway and Herbalife and Tupperware, Avon, household names. So you sell crypto rather than Tupperware or shampoo or vitamins. You sell crypto to your friends and family, and you get a cut of the money they give you. And then they sell it to their friends and family, and you get a cut of that as well. And so you build up this sales structure beneath you. And this thing took off. I mean, because it was almost like the perfect multi-level marketing product, because you didn't have to fill your garage up with vitamins, and you could just sit on your investment and watch it go up in value. That was the theory anyway. So it exploded. She always said, though, there's going to be a bit of a delay before you can turn your coins back into fiat money, into pounds and dollars and euros. And she'd make excuses, and there's technical issues, and there's regulatory problems. And she kept delaying this moment. The price of the coin kept going up, and she kept telling people that was based on some kind of either a clever algorithm or a market value, because you could buy and sell a small volume of them. And then by the time she's got about 1 million investors who collectively have put in at least 4 billion euros, but probably more, she gets on a Ryanair flight from Sofia, Bulgaria to Athens, Greece, October 2017, and just vanishes into thin air. The whole thing's just a Ponzi scheme. I mean, it's just it's a very standard scam, but using crypto to confuse and baffle regulators and investors as to what it really was. And she's just vanished, and she's been vanished ever since. So it's just the most incredible story. When we were making it, there were times when me and Georgia would look at each other and think, is this a bit like the Truman Show? Is this a big setup? Is this for real? This just doesn't seem possible. But then you'd see videos of 10,000 screaming fans in Thailand or London or Singapore or wherever. And the story, the Missing Cryptoqueen podcast, was trying to expose the scam and how it worked, and work out where Dr. Ruja went when she stepped off that Ryanair flight.
Yeah, I think you're right, though. It's multi-level marketing with the rocket fuel of the crypto craze. And
That's
and
it.
It was, one time I covered one of these multi-level marketing
You did?
schemes a long time ago in New York City, but it was just a kind of vanilla basic one. But it was amazing because a friend of mine said that somebody approached him on the street, and they're all wearing like a suit,
Yeah.
And you got to come to this conference center on Saturday. It's going to be a huge thing. And we went, and we actually mic'd up, like it was like a hidden mic kind of thing. And I was so impressed with the way they could pressure you using sound, using like little gifts. Like for example, when you arrived, they made a big deal of giving you a glass of water, but it created this kind of debt. Like they're already giving me things, a glass of water. There's techno music. There's this like grandiose thing, and that's all the same stuff.
Yeah.
That she was doing. And I think what's so special about her is she doesn't come across as your average scammer. She actually was quite polished.
Right. Exactly.
And kind of credible. In
Exactly.
a way. But do you think that she was rotten from the second that she got involved, or and forgive me if I forget, but is there a deeper history of this kind of behavior for her? But I can't remember now from the original
right.
days.
Well, I mean, so firstly, you're absolutely right, and I say to people a lot in a lot of scams, these people are master psychological manipulators. You show your wealth, you don't push it on people. They check the temperature of the room over and over again when they're doing the sales pitch. They're so good. And they can sell anything. And everybody I've spoken to who invested in OneCoin, which is a lot of people I've spoken to, obviously, from all walks of life, without fail has said, I never thought I would fall for this. Thought I was too clever. And that's almost like the minute you think that, you're in trouble, because these people are so smart. So there's a lot to this and what they do, and I think the scam could have collapsed earlier were it not for timing, because just as as OneCoin was starting to run out of energy, and multi-level marketing scams, like all Ponzi schemes, they're like sharks. They have to keep moving and growing, and the minute the growth stops, it dies because the money's no longer going up the pyramid anymore, and you've got to always be recruiting more people. As it was petering out, Bitcoin went on its first proper bull run. This was in the summer to autumn of 2017. So suddenly everyone's piling back in again, wants to get back in on the crypto craze. And so she got lucky or unlucky maybe with the timing, because I don't think she ever thought it was going to get this big. To your question, was it a real scam from the start? Yes, it was, the way it was designed. But I don't think she ever thought it was going to be as big as it became. There were a lot of cryptocurrencies that were running ICOs, initial coin offerings, making wild promises about how they were going to transform web hosting or publishing or a million different things behind financial services and bank settlement payments and all sorts of things. Crypto, blockchain is going to change this, and this is and I predict the price of it is going to go in through the roof, and they would often collapse, and investors would lose their money, and no one really was ever prosecuted for that. And I think she expected it to be something like that. $5 million, $10 million, enough to make a lot of money, but probably not to get you on the FBI's 10 most wanted list. And I think that's where she thought it was going to go. But she did have a history, because she was convicted in 2016 of a crime she committed in 2011, which was essentially bankrupting a German steel manufacturer, basically a factory in Germany that was making machine parts, large, heavy machine parts, and for embezzlement and for faulty accounting, and she had multiple counts she was convicted of. So she did have history in some kind of financial crime, but nothing of the scale of this. And she did have a PhD in international law and a master's degree from Oxford University. So she was a credible person, and she wasn't like a typical multi-level marketer. And the multi-level marketers who were, often they'd done this before with other dodgy MLMs, would often point to her and say, does she look like and they'd make a joke of it. They'd say, yeah, I know I look like your typical MLM seller, yeah, but look at this woman. This is not your typical scammer, is it? So this is why this is a different MLM to all the others.
I guess, though, isn't another distinguishing thing between OneCoin and any cryptocurrency is sort of that OneCoin wasn't a really functioning cryptocurrency the same way the other ones were, right? It was more of an actual like Excel sheet.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, to sort of really simplify. There's a few twists and turns in the story, but I mean, basically, for the most part, the entries of the coin holdings that each investor had on a normal cryptocurrency would be hosted on this mathematically, this mathematically secure ledger, this public blockchain where you could see what you had, you could see what other people had. It was an irreversible database. And that was supposed to be the sort of the value of it. It was protected by maths, couldn't be edited or deleted and all the rest of it. And she essentially was just hot. People were investing, let's say you do invest 5,000 euros, you get 10,000 OneCoin, and she'd just have an Excel file that said, Bradley's got 10,000 OneCoin in his account. And then that would be pushed onto a good looking front end. So when you logged onto the website, you'd see 10,000 OneCoin in your account. It all looked really good. And most investors, I mean, how would they really know the difference? These were non-sophisticated. She was targeting the second wave of crypto investors, the ordinary retail investors, not the technical nerds that had got into Bitcoin. And she knew that. So they didn't know what the hell they were doing for the most part. So they didn't know how to check any of this. They just trusted her because she looked credible.
Yeah, that's true. And there are so many people becoming millionaires from Bitcoin at the same time. So everyone wanted access, but that felt rarefied. It's hard to get into Bitcoin.
Yeah.
How am I going to set that up? It wasn't as consumer friendly.
No, she played to that. She said Bitcoin is for nerds, techie people. It's for geeks, hackers, drug dealers. You're an ordinary person. This world is impossible to access for you. But I've got the one that's easy. It's literally click, send me the money, I'll get your coins. And the dinner table advice is always, well, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. And she would be promising, hundreds, if not thousands of % annual returns. But she'd always say, well, Bitcoin did go up that far, so why wouldn't this one?
Yeah, true.
And that was a really tough thing for people. People just, I always say this to people who are critical of the OneCoin investors. They say, well, you're greedy. Why do you thought you were going to invest £5,000 and get £100,000 the next year? Like, obviously, you sort of deserve to lose your money. Those people, though, it was like a lottery ticket in a way. They didn't want 10% annual return because they wanted to change their lives. They wanted the Lamborghini, they wanted a holiday. And sometimes it was things like, I just want to be able to pay off some of my mortgage or help my kids, like pretty basic things. And for a few hundred or few thousand euros, there seemed to be a chance to do that. 30% annual return on an investment, which is incredible. It doesn't mean anything if you've got £1,000 in your bank account. What's that going to do for you? It's not going to change anything. So that's why so many people were sucked into this possibility of changing their life.
Yeah, I think also it's most people think of themselves as the main character of their own story, and they don't see themselves as just like a rube in someone else's story.
Yeah.
So I think the dream of this was just too strong. I think everyone wants to change their life somehow, and it's tough to do that by scrimping and saving, and then like making a real estate investment. It's hard to buy a house. So why not take this shortcut?
And I've often said this to people, and it's hard to accept, but if you're hearing about this great investment, you, ordinary person on the street, I'm sorry, it is too late. By the time it's got to you, especially now with cryptocurrencies, you're up against some of the world's top investors with the fastest machines ever built. You are not ahead of the curve. You are somewhere at the back of the queue. I know you think you've got in early because your friend told you that, but you really haven't.
Yeah, that's true. I can't remember the term, but when I was at the Wall Street Journal, there's a term that those big investors refer to retail investors, which is essentially like the uneducated investor.
Yeah.
And all of their profits are in dealing with that person.
Yes, exactly.
So
they pump the price up.
This is an exaggeration or a complete, exorbitant version of it. But in reality, this happens every day. Even if you go on Robinhood and you're trading stock, Robinhood sells its flow to those quants who can trade against it, because you don't know what's happening. You don't have any real intelligence. You're following like a trend, and they can play against that and make money. And
it's hard to get that into people's heads because, like you said, no one wants to hear that. Everyone's the hero of their own story. Yeah. But we got to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. But how has this story affected you? I mean, one of the things that's amazing about it is it's ongoing. You just had another episode out last week?
A couple of weeks ago.
Yeah. And so, I mean, are you still spending like 20% of your time or 10% of your time, fielding things coming in and just thinking about the case?
It's a good question, this, because it's not the normal model for a BBC podcast, or indeed any podcast, really, because you have your budget, and it's got to be, published on this day, fit in with the schedule, and you've also got to manage your own time. But this story just never ends, and so it's sort of all-consuming in the sense that I'm always open and I'm always waiting and half expecting emails, messages, sightings. I constantly get sightings of where Ruja apparently is, and I've seen her here and I've seen her there. But I don't really get sort of paid for that, because what tends to happen is we collect information and sightings, and the story twists and turns, and then maybe there's a prosecution and there's some court papers, and that gives us something else. And we sort of build that up slowly and then go back to the BBC and say, I think we've got enough for a couple more episodes. How long? When can we put them out? What do you think? And the reality is you must have had it with your stories, Bradley. There's lots that I find fascinating about it because I'm so into it. But I know that most listeners just want to know where that woman has gone. And I still can't really tell them that. And I don't want to just keep labouring it. I got some messages when the last episode came out saying, you're really milking this story now. Just tell us where she is. And if you don't know, just admit it. And I wanted to reply saying, there's been I've done 3 episodes in the last 4 years. Is that really milking it? But I feel like I'm stretching it out in the sense that I wait between episodes. We could make an episode a week and just try and keep churning them out, but I'm trying to be very careful with this audience.
Yeah.
And only putting things out when it feels like there's a development in the story. But the most common question, no matter what I post about, I've got new projects that I'm working on and I put them out, and I always get people just replying saying, when is the next episode coming out? So no, it's just I'm always associated with the story now.
And what about the victims? I mean, do they see you as a key person to be in touch with?
I think so. I mean, I think when we first started, no one had really reported on this. There'd been the odd article here and there, but not in the way we did. And I think at the beginning, we were the only ones really on this story. So at that point, yes. But since that podcast came out, journalists from all over the world have now got involved and investigating their own bits of the story. And there's court cases in Germany and there's court cases in India. And, you know, and so there's now a much bigger ecosystem of people looking into this. There was a recent thing about Dubai properties that were related to OneCoin holders that multiple newspapers did together. So it's gotten bigger, but I still think we're the OG. And I think that, yes, we still get a lot of victims coming to us and asking for help. And it's tough sometimes as well, because I've probably more than OneCoin victims every time a new episode comes out, but especially when the first season came out in 2019, I must have had 50 emails from different people who'd said they'd lost money in similar scams. Can I help them? And I just felt a bit helpless. Like I can't investigate every single crypto scam.
Yeah.
And it was horrible because I didn't know what to say to them. And it's like, not really. I can't really investigate this other similar clone scam. I'm sorry. I can't, but I wish I could help you. And that's horrible. I hated that.
Yeah. Well, it's just, journalism is not about justice in a way. It's about illuminating something, a problem, and making people know about it. But it's not, you can't do every single case. You would spend your whole career, most of you would, and you would only be able to cover about half of them still.
And also even down to the fact that would anyone want to listen to me doing another podcast about almost the same but slightly different story? They wouldn't. So it wouldn't even have the same impact.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's that has been frustrating, and that's sort of been a bit of a sort of something I've learned. And I think with this kind of journalism, you always hope that there's people out there you've helped that you don't realise. So maybe people that were on the verge of investing in another scam heard the podcast and didn't, or were thinking about investing in OneCoin and didn't. And you never hear from those people, but you just hope that maybe, especially with the Cryptoqueen, because it was quite popular, it's just helped everyone be a little bit more. My dream was there'd be dinner parties where people would be pitching crypto and multi-level marketing, and someone would pipe up and say, has anyone heard that podcast though? That sounds all a bit similar to that OneCoin thing. I wouldn't get involved. And even because that's the level that people remember this at. You think the listener's going to remember every little detail and twist and turn? No. They'll vaguely remember having heard a podcast about a missing woman and a crypto scam that was actually multi-level marketing. And that's enough. If that person's at a dinner party when it's being pitched and they say, listen to this podcast before you invest, maybe we saved 10 people at that party. So I think that's what it's about. But you don't ever get the feeling of helping anyone because you never know about those conversations.
Yeah. But I think, well, just also journalistically, in terms of the format, you really were one of the pioneers of the investigative podcast that made you kind of sit at the edge of your seat, because you never know where it's going to go next week.
Well,
and you did the work. You went on the ground. You were in Germany at one point, I remember, and
Uganda,
exactly.
Romania, Bulgaria. It was risky because people don't look. When you think of those amazing American podcasts, which we all sort of are inspired by somehow, I know Caliphate had a few problems with it afterwards, but Serial was the one that everyone just was suddenly blown away by. They're often sort of pre-packaged and made months before they're released. And the stories, yes, you can write them so they're very exciting and they're full of cliffhangers. But it's all actually been done already. We genuinely had no idea what was going to happen in the next episode. We only had 1 week to make each episode. So we're rushing around, and if you listen to it, you can tell it's a little bit ropey in places. Like the recording quality is not great. Maybe because we were sometimes putting that together like to the minute before it was going to be published, because we were doing it that week, and that was really risky for the BBC to do that.
Yeah,
we didn't know what was going to happen.
There's no commissioners out there that want to have a podcast come out where they don't know the end.
No,
but that's why I think it's so refreshing to hear things like that, where you feel a real sense of risk, and you
can't fake it either.
Yeah,
you can't.
And that
fake
ropiness is good, actually. You know, it's the little roughness that makes it sound like it's not prepackaged entertainment. You know, so many podcasts are just entertainment,
and you feel like you've been manipulated slightly by the producers and by the presenter. But we really didn't know what we were doing. I mean, maybe helped by the fact we'd never made a podcast either. Yeah. So we didn't know many of the tricks and techniques. Yeah. But it was wild, man. It was a wild ride. Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, you did 2 other big podcasts in the last couple of years.
I've written another one as well called A Very British Cult. Another investigation into a crazy story, but I wasn't the presenter, I was just the writer.
Excellent. Well, so do you think you're going to stick with podcasts? Is that your new profession in a sense?
I think podcasts sort of might be sticking with me, because I feel like you're right. I presented 3 podcasts. I think the Missing Cryptoqueen was a special one. Believe in Magic, I think, was even wilder in some ways in terms of what the story actually was. But I've realised that there's not that many people that have made as many long-form, multi-part podcasts as I have. I feel like I've suddenly become like one of the country's leading experts in how you do this by mistake, and which is a really privileged position to be in. Like I wanted to be, my dream was always to be a book writer. That was and I wrote loads of books, and some of them sold quite well, and some of them didn't sell as well. And but I'm competing against such brilliant writers who've got years of experience. They're just better than me at doing it. But with podcasts, I am actually one of the leading people in this. So maybe I should stick with it, because it seems to be what I'm good at and what I've done more of than anything else now.
Yeah, I think so. I think I would definitely tune into any Jamie Bartlett show, because I know you're not going to waste our time. I know you're gonna do the work. You know. Well, thank you so much for joining us at Whale Hunting. That's it for this week. Thanks to Jamie for joining us. You can find the Missing Cryptoqueen and his other shows in your favorite podcast app. If you're enjoying whale hunting, make sure to check out our website at whalehunting.projectbrazen.com, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week for more.
Thanks.
Brazen.com.